everybody's been talking, Friedberg, about this AlphaFold, this folding proteins. And there's some new version out from Google. And also, Google reportedly, we talked about this before, is also advancing talks to acquire HubSpot. So that rumor for the $30 billion market cap, HubSpot is out there as well. Friedberg, you're as our resident science sultan, our resident sultan of science, and as a Google alumni, pick either story and let's go for it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure there's much more to add on the HubSpot acquisition rumors. They are still just rumors, and I think we covered the topic a couple of weeks ago. But I will say that AlphaFold 3 that was just announced today and demonstrated by Google is a real, I would say, breathtaking moment for biology, for bioengineering, for human health, for medicine. And maybe I'll just take 30 seconds to kind of explain it. You remember when they introduced AlphaFold, at AlphaFold 2, we talked about DNA codes for proteins. So every 3 letters of DNA codes for an amino acid. So a string of DNA codes for a string of amino acids, and that's called a gene that produces a protein. And that protein is basically a long, like think about beads. There's 20 different types of beads, 20 different amino acids that can be strung together. And what happens is that necklace, that bead necklace, basically collapses on itself, and all those little beads stick together with each other in some complicated way that we can't deterministically model. And that creates a 3-dimensional structure, which is called a protein, that molecule. And that molecule does something interesting. It can break apart other molecules, it can bind molecules, it can move molecules around. So it's basically the machinery of chemistry, of biochemistry. And so proteins are what is encoded in our DNA, and then the proteins do all the work of making living organisms. So Google's AlphaFold project took 3-dimensional images of proteins and the DNA sequence that codes for those proteins, and then they built a predictive model that predicted the 3-dimensional structure of a protein from the DNA that codes for it. And that was a huge breakthrough years ago. What they just announced with AlphaFold 3 today is that they're now including all small molecules, so all the other little molecules that go into chemistry and biology that drive the function of everything we see around us. And the way that all those molecules actually bind and fit together is part of the predictive model. Why is that important? Well, let's say that you're designing a new drug and it's a protein-based drug, which biologic drugs, which most drugs are today. You could find a biologic drug that binds to a cancer cell, and then you'll spend 10 years going to clinical trials. And billions of dollars later, you find out that that protein accidentally binds to other stuff and hurts other stuff in the body. And that's an off-target effect or a side effect. And that drug is pulled from the clinical trials and it never goes to market. Most drugs go through that process. They are actually tested in animals and then in humans. And we find all these side effects that arise from those drugs because we don't know how those drugs are going to bind or interact with other things in our biochemistry. And we only discovered after we put it in. But now we can actually model that with software. We can take that drug, we can create a 3-dimensional representation of it using the software, and we can model how that drug might interact with all the other cells, all the other proteins, all the other small molecules in the body to find all the off-target effects that may arise and decide whether or not that presents a good drug candidate. That is one example of how this capability can be used. And there are many, many others, including creating new proteins that could be used to bind molecules or stick molecules together, or new proteins that could be designed to rip molecules apart. We can now predict the function of 3-dimensional molecules using this capability, which opens up all of the software-based design of chemistry, of biology, of drugs. And it really is an incredible breakthrough moment. The interesting thing that happened, though, is Google Alphabet has a subsidiary called Isomorphic Labs. It is a drug development subsidiary of Alphabet. And they've basically kept all the IP for AlphaFold 3 in Isomorphic. So Google is going to monetize the heck out of this capability. And what they made available was not open source code, but a web-based viewer that scientists, for quote, non-commercial purposes, can use to do some fundamental research in a web-based viewer and make some experiments and try stuff out and how interactions might occur. But no one can use it for commercial use. Only Google's Isomorphic Labs can. So number one, it's an incredible demonstration of what AI outside of LLMs, which we just talked about with Sam today, and obviously we talked about other models, but LLMs being kind of this consumer text predictive model capability. But outside of that, there's this capability in things like chemistry with these new AI models that can be trained and built to predict things like 3-dimensional chemical interactions that is going to open up an entirely new era for human progress. And I think that's what's so exciting. I think the other side of this is Google is hugely advantaged, and they just showed the world a little bit about some of these jewels that they have in the treasure chest. And they're like, look at what we got. We're going to make all these drugs. And they've got partnerships with all these pharma companies at Isomorphic Labs that they've talked about. And it's going to usher in a new era of drug development design for human health. So all in all, I'd say it's a pretty astounding day. A lot of people are going crazy over the capability that they just demonstrated. And then it begs all this really interesting question around what's Google going to do with it and how much value is going to be created here. So anyway, I thought it was a great story, and I just rambled on for a couple of minutes, but I don't know, it's pretty cool.
Super interesting. Is this AI capable of making a science corner that David Sachs pays attention to?
Well, it will predict the cure, I think, for the common cold and for herpes, so he should pay attention.
Absolutely. Folding Cells is the app that Sachs, casual game Sachs just downloaded is playing. How many chess moves did you make during that segment, Sachs?
Sorry, let me just say one more thing. Do you guys remember we talked about Yamanaka factors and how challenging it is to basically, we can reverse aging if we can get the right proteins into cells to tune the expression of certain genes to make those cells youthful. Right now, it's a shotgun approach to trying millions of compounds and combinations of compounds to do that. And there's a lot of companies actually trying to do this right now to come up with a fountain of youth type product. We can now simulate that. So with this system, one of the things that this AlphaFold 3 can do is predict what molecules will bind and promote certain sequences of DNA, which is exactly what we try and do with the Yamanaka factor-based expression systems, and find ones that won't trigger off-target expression. So meaning we can now go through the search space in software of creating a combination of molecules that theoretically could unlock this fountain of youth to de-age all the cells in the body and introduce an extraordinary kind of health benefit. And that's just, again, one example of the many things that are possible with this sort of platform. I got to be honest, I'm really just sort of skimming the surface here of what this can do. The capabilities and the impact are going to be I don't know. I know I say this sort of stuff a lot, but it's going to be pretty profound.
There's on the blog post, they have this incredible video that they show of the coronavirus that creates a common cold. I think the 7-PNM protein. And not only did they literally predict it accurately, they also predicted how it interacts with an antibody, with a sugar. It's nuts. So you could see a world where I don't know, you just get a vaccine for the cold and it's kind of like you never have colds again.
Amazing.
I mean, simple stuff, but so powerful.
And you can filter out stuff that has off-target effects. So much of drug discovery and all the side effect stuff can start to be solved for in silico. Yeah. And you could think about running extraordinarily large, use a model like this, run extraordinarily large simulations in a search space of chemistry to find stuff that does things in the body that can unlock, all these benefits, can do all sorts of amazing things to destroy cancer, to destroy viruses, to repair cells, to de-age cells.
And this is $100 billion business, they say.
Oh my God. I mean, this alone, I feel like this is where I've said this before. I think Google's got this portfolio of quiet,
the other bets. What if they hit?
Yeah.
What if they hit?
And I think the fact that they didn't open source everything in this says a lot about their intentions. Yeah.
Yeah. Open source when you're behind, closed source, lock it up when you're ahead.